Telecoms giant MTN has come out tops as South Africa's most valuable brand. The company has been reigning as the top brand in the land for the last 3 years. Brand Finance Africa says it's important to recognize brands because essentially corporate brands represent who we are as a nation. They are an extension of how we as South Africans express ourselves, and ultimately these brands help create jobs. Well, to discuss further the whole concept of brand serving an ambassadorial function, I have with me in studio Dr. Petrus de Kock, GM of Brand SA.
Thank you.
Welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Let's use MTN as an example. What makes a brand hail as the top brand in the country?
Well, I think if you look at the methodology behind the announcement of MTN as the top brand, they look at various factors. Mainly it's turnover, it's the kind of the bulk size of the turnover of the company. There's another category that they also look at the most, the strongest brand that speaks to customer experience. So there's different categories in which they weigh.
Competitiveness, I'm assuming as well.
Competitiveness and customer service and satisfaction. But MTN by far, in terms of just capitalization, the biggest SA brand, basically.
How is a corporate brand related to our national identity, as pointed out by Brand Africa?
I'll answer it via a project that we initiated last year as Brand South Africa. We initiated a project, we call it the SA Incorporated project. And the purpose of that is to do a more holistic analysis of South Africa's presence on the African continent. If you think of it, currently South Africa is the second largest source of foreign direct investment in the African economy. We rank neck and neck with the UK, for example. Now that means our corporate brands and our expertise as a country plays a tremendously big role in the coalface of experience in peer African countries, be it in the DRC, be it in Kenya, Ghana. If you look at Nigeria, for example, we have more than 150 big South African corporates active in the market. So that experience of service, of
expertise,
goods,
of delivery,
expertise, of management and so forth is an indispensable element, I would say, of building the reputation of the country, not only on the continent but globally, ultimately. If you look at Sasol, for example, who's also one of the top 5 brands of the country this year. If you look at the global footprint of Sasol, they're active in the Middle East, they're active in the United States. So it really carries the flag in a very significant way.
How have corporate brands negatively impact on South Africa's overall image from your research or from past experience? Have we had those experiences?
I think our South African corporates have been very good, especially in the African environment. There's been small cases, but it's typical kind of corporate experience. There may be some labor issues, or there may be some perception issues that play a role. But I'll use one example. If you look at Stanbic Bank in East Africa, Stanbic in East Africa, in Kenya particularly, in our research in Kenya, we found that Kenyans perceive Stanbic as a Kenyan organization, probably because more than 80% of the employees are Kenyan. So the localization and the strategy that the corporates use to embed themselves in the market.
To invest in local people, to invest in local communities. That's also
a very important aspect, of managing the reputation and managing the image, basically, not only of the company, but also of the country indirectly.
Let's unpack Brand SA's mandates. What do you do? There's so many perceptions out there around what it is that you're supposed to be doing as an organization. The one negative perception is that you basically serve as a spin doctor, a PR function. Yeah.
Well, we've come across the idea that we are spin doctors, but, quite frankly speaking, if you look into our trust deed and our mandate, the 2 core areas of our activity is to act as the marketing agency of the nation brand, of the entity, of the country as a whole, and also as a reputation management agency. So our core focus is marketing the country internationally and domestically, focusing on issues that impact on the reputation and competitiveness of the country. But behind the scenes, behind that activity, just in my function in research in Brand SA, we have a massive research portfolio, both domestically as well as internationally, where we dig into a range of things, perceptions of the country internationally, trends in international markets and regions that impact on the country, because our approach or our strategy has to speak to not only how do we get the message of South Africa conveyed internationally, but also to how do we respond to very dynamic global markets.
And that communication process can be quite delicate. delegates?
Yes, no, it's a very interesting process, because we straddle the worlds of business, academia, government, because ultimately the nation brand, and this is something that I think we put a lot of emphasis on, the nation brand is a combination of 52, 53 million people, the most diversified economy on the African continent, a very sophisticated infrastructure base. You can have a massive list of all the attributes that we have. So what we basically then do is, what are the attributes of the nation? Where are the strengths that we can leverage on to tell the story of South Africa?
And how do you actually serve by opening up dialogue here at home among South Africans when it comes to contentious issues like xenophobia, for example?
We were very active with a lot of government entities and business in the months just around that time. I'll give you some examples of how our operations work. We are, as a brand organization, we cannot manage and project the image of the country if we are not open to South Africans. So, for example, we've got several different initiatives. We've got dialogues that we have partnerships with the Sowetan newspaper, for example, that's very much community focused, understanding issues in communities, getting a two-way conversation going between us and South Africans. In the business environment, we have initiatives like the South African Competitiveness Forum. This year, for example, we are running a series of 9 Competitiveness Forum focus groups in each one of the provinces, and the purpose of that is for us to be more informed in terms of activities in provinces, strategies, unique features of the provinces, so that when we market and profile the country, we also relate the story of the building blocks of the brand. The metros, for example, just the city that we are in, Johannesburg, is a major component of the bigger picture of the nation brand. So our work has to take us into conversation with experts. We do not sweep things under the carpet. If anyone who's ever participated in our discussions, we've sometimes had people who are very surprised at the kind of issues that we raise.
I often get the comment when interviewing, for example, analysts or economists, when they have to paint the bleak picture of the economic outlook. Well, that's the reality. We're not, if you want a brand essay analysis, well, that's something else.
Yeah. Well, but look, I think maybe just a comment on that. I think what we must be aware of as South Africans, is that yes, we do have challenges, but the point is that ultimately those challenges can only be surmounted with creative engagement. I think this habit that we have of always harping on what we think is wrong, because in what is wrong, you can already find a solution.
There are always blessings in every challenge.
So I think that is what we try to do. We don't try to...
And it's the stimulation to move forward as a nation.
We can't just sugarcoat stuff. There's some very hard and bitter pills that we have to swallow sometimes. But the fact remains, how do we as a nation progress? How do we grow ourselves?
Very valid point. You do partner a lot with media practitioners. Do you think that the messages are very balanced? They provide a balanced perspective on what's happening in South Africa, or to some degree it's hyped up?
It depends. I think sometimes there's a lot of hype, in some of the headlines. Our thinking is unfortunately very much headline driven, and then sometimes you see a headline, you start reading the article, you get to the end of the article and you wonder, now, how is this connected to the headline? So what I'm trying to say is, I think sometimes we need much more balance. But also, I think we need more constructive engagement. I find sometimes it quite frustrating personally, if you see an issue that's raised in a media debate, but then it falls into the trap of just more and more and more criticism, when actually in this country we've got tremendous knowledge and tremendous expertise, that can actually, in new ways, think about how can we move around some of the traps that we have, how can we solve some of the problems that we are confronted with.
I think it comes back to communication as a process being delicate, because we all have our own perception as well. I mean, I've seen so many cases where the media or reporters will report on something, but how it's digested and how it's perceived from the different frame of references impacts on opinion.
Definitely.
And then in some situations, unfortunately, the media always has to face the consequences of that.
No, for sure. And I think
it comes down to perception. But then again, it's a reflection of our need to engage. to be more open,
Yes.
to engage more.
Yes, yes. Look, we have a tremendous public discourse in South Africa. I think we've got tremendous media network, radio, print, online, and so forth. So we're quite blessed that way.
Yeah.
And I think also the thing that we must guard as South Africans is our open democratic system, and an open public space where you
And
can
to
raise issues.
To
I think
engage
that's,
constructively so that we can move forward.
That's in the core of who we are and what we stand for as a country. And as Brand SA, I think that's why we have these kind of partnerships with, be it media, with academic organizations, with business, with government, where our learning, constant learning as an organization has to be connected to the issues in our society, because we are also asked to respond to those kind of things. So be it in a policy realm, then we work with government, be it in a civil society realm. We've got a very strong civil society program that links to anything from youth organizations to labor organizations. And we have a constant process of engagement, of sharing knowledge. For example, from the research side, we call it a feedback loop, that we constantly feed back to our stakeholders. What's the performance of the country? What are the issues that you see as a stakeholder? And then we have the channels that we can feed it back into government space, to kind of convey messages, either the good or the bad.
Yeah, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Hope to hear more from you.
We hope so. We'll be engaging with you.
Take care. Thank you so much.